one we learned. How do you dance before the kala? And I was saying that Mefoshim asking the Gemara Brachas, it says that if you eat from the sud of a chassan and you're not mesameg the chassan, you're over in 5 kolos. So the Pashto Pshat is there. If you remember, we learned early in the Gemara that the chassan used to pay for the wedding. So if you eat from the wedding, you're not mesameg the chassan, the one who pays for it, you're over 5 kolos. And when it comes to meraktin, we say from the kala. Rashi.
What does kolot mean?
Sorry?
It says, over b'chamishach kolot. What does kolot mean?
Oh, 5 voices. It says kol chassan, kol kala, kol chassan, kol simcha, kol. You remember the 5 kolos from the Shobrach. It's the last of the Shobrach.
Oh.
And Rashi says it interesting. Kates of Meraktim, Rashi says, Ma oimrim lefaneh. They didn't actually dance. It's what they said before her. We'll talk about a mitzvah dance a little bit later. So, what do you say to the kala when you're dancing? Shammai says, kala kamoishehi. What do you mean, kala kamoishehi? It's a big argument in Rishonim. Rashi says, according to Beis Shammai, who was very, stern and rigid, he said, you gotta tell it the way it is. In other words, you find one good aspect about her and hone in on it. She has a nice nose, talk about how wonderful a nose is. She has a nice eye, and don't talk about anything else. Don't say that she's good in other things. Just speak the truth. Other Rishonim say, you just say these words, kala kamoishi. She is what she is, the way she is. However, Basil says, kala nova chasuda. You say that she's nice and she's pretty, she's charitable, and so on and so forth. Rashi says kala nova means that she has a certain charm. Says the Gemara. So Basil says you exaggerate sometimes. If somebody was limping or somebody was blind, you're always going to say these, that you're a beautiful kala when in fact perhaps she's not. And you're not allowed to lie. According to you, let me ask you a question. A guy bought a bad purchase in the market. He bought a nice car, and he's so happy, and you look at it, it looks like a piece of trash. Are you going to praise it in front of him? Or you're going to embarrass it, or you're going to denigrate this item. Of course, you'll be nice. So the same thing here. You have to be immense. You have to learn how to socialize and mingle amongst people and say nice things. This Gemara is a very difficult Gemara to understand. And interesting, the Mepharshim don't try to explain it. But before I tell you that, the bottom line is, so what Basil is saying, is Basil saying you're permitted to lie in order to be nice with people, so you're actually permitted to lie. Is that what we're saying over here? Rashi doesn't spell that out, but it takes us a read on the side, and a number of others Rishonim learn you're permitted to lie. And others say you're not really lying, you're just exaggerating. Now, Beis Shammai asked the question, so what's Basil answering? When you buy a new item, don't you lie? So how's that answer the question? The Torah said you're not allowed to lie. So just like you're not permitted to lie when it comes to a kala, who said you're permitted to lie when it comes to a person who bought a new product? Just because people do it, it's wrong, it's lying. So what exactly is the discussion? And our Gemara here is very hard to understand. In fact, it's impossible to understand the Gemara. This Gemara is also quoted in one of the Masechtas on the back of Shas. And what's interesting is that on the side of the Gemara here, when they always bring sources, they don't bring the source. There's a Masechta called Masechta Kala, which is in the back of Gemara Avodah Zarah. And there we have the same discussion, but it goes further. If there's no Mefarshim there, so it's difficult to understand the Gemara there. Basically, it goes further. And Hillel answers back. You want to know about Vashaka Tirchak? That it only applies to the Noki V'Tzadik Al Tarik. In other words, what Beis Hillel is saying is very important. There's no Aveira of lying. Bottom line, Beis Hillel said there's no Aveira called lying. You're permitted to lie. Not allowed to swear false, but you're permitted to lie. It's not a decent thing to do, but there's no Aveira. But what the Torah says, Vashaka Tirchak, says this hill that's only limited to a case in a court. If you're standing in a courtroom and you're giving evidence, you're not permitted to lie. Where it says in the pasuk, the next pasuk says, "We're not b'tzadik al tarik." You shouldn't kill an innocent person. Therefore, Beis Hillel is saying there's no isur of lying. The isur of lying is only in a courtroom. There's no isur. We're going to learn about Metzir in Daf Mem Tes in Hazav about that That's not a good thing to lie, but nothing to do with the Isser of Midbar Shekatirchak. And therefore says Hillel, that's why the Minig Olam is that sometimes because of the Shalom Bayis or because we had Mari Vamas, for the sake of peace. And over here, you want to be Mu'ur ben Abrius, you bend the truth. In fact, you can lie. In these circumstances, you're permitted to lie. Otherwise, without that Gemara Masechta Kala, this Gemara here just is very cryptic, and the Mefarshim all over here don't explain it. And it's missing the main meat. How does he answer Bishama's question? Okay, let's continue. Says the Gemara. So now we're continuing about the different kinds of praises. Kiasa Rav Dimi Amar. Rav Dimi came along. He said, "So we're talking about Ketzavos Daf, and these are other songs that they did." Kiasa Dimi Amar Hachi Masha Kami Kalos and Marava. They used to sing before a kala in the West in Eretz Yisrael, and they said this girl is so pretty that they would say, "This is the song they would say." Like a chal doesn't need eye makeup, like shal doesn't need face makeup, but to redden her face. And what do you call it? Pirchais, and in order she need to take her hair and turn them into braids. V'yalas chein. She has plenty of charm and she looks beautiful. So that's how they praise her. And in fact, in a way, in this way, you're not even lying. You're not saying anything in particular, whatever it is. You're just saying that wow, look how beautiful she is. And that's what they sing before Kalas. Now the Gemara talks about songs that they were singing. So they also used to sing this when they used to give smicha to a Rav. This is what they used to sing. They would say the same thing, more like an allegory, that he doesn't need any he doesn't need to be the greatest orator in the world. A real Rav is somebody who knows how to learn, who knows the halacha, knows everything, and he doesn't have all this the veneer maybe he doesn't have, but he's the real thing. That's what a Rav should be. When they get this is the song they sang. Call me Dane, but call me Dane. Anybody similar to these rabbis, you should give smicha to them because they're wonderful people. But you shouldn't give smicha to who? Like Tisvachalana, don't give smicha lay misamisin. Don't give people who don't learn straight and they twist everything around. And the lay misamitin. And nor do you give smicha to people who are like shmatas, that they don't explain themselves properly. They're just paskin, and a real psak is where you give the reason behind it, and not just to say yes, no, or say one word that no one has a clue what you're talking about, because you're not educating your people this way, and you have to educate them in halachas. So if you have smicha, if you're a rav, you have certain responsibilities. The responsibilities are not, you don't have to be the greatest orator in the world. You don't have to be chitzonis. You don't need all these extra things. It's a plus, but it's not necessary. What is necessary is that you have to be Yoreh Shemayim, a God-fearing person, and you have to have content, substance. And you have to know what you're saying and explain yourself to the people so they understand where you're coming from. Especially when you're saying something is forbidden, you need to explain why that is so. Says the Gemara. The others say what you said was Leimin Chamisin, not a fifth. That means again, you only gave them a fifth of the reason why. Again, you're not explaining yourself, being very cryptic. And Veloi mid Turmason, and not from Turmason, which Rashi says here, interesting, he doesn't know what it means. And others say that Turmason is, we had Turmason as a kind of a vegetable or Shabbos that took a long time to cook. So these are like people who are I guess, ladygays, people who have nothing, no substance. So let's go further. Talking about smicha, what they used to say, So the Gemara Rabavu was somebody that we learned was very beloved by the royal family or by the government. When he would come from the yeshiva and he'd go to the house of the Kesar, all the maids would come out towards him. This is what they sing. Rabba Da'ameh, that the great rabbi from his people. And the and the leader of his people, of his nation, that a candle that is burning bright. Praise is you who came in peace. No, he came here to our place in peace. Omru Allah. It's interesting that the Shayim have an argument what the word Baruch Maskil L'Shalom is, when all it is the maid singing a song. I mean, it doesn't really matter what they meant. Anyway, the Ritva and others say Baruch Maskil L'Shalom means blessed is the one who brought you here in peace. No, they're benching the Eibishter, not benching him, but benching the Eibishter. They said about Rabbi Bar Eloi. At a wedding, he would be the center of the dancing, and he would be a juggler. He would take a bad of a hadar, take a myrtle, he would hold it and dance before the kala. As we said before, it seems clearly Merakid means that they used to dance. And yet the Rashi before said, what do they say? And he would say then this song, Kalan Nova Chasud, like Basil said. Rashmul Barabitzchak Merakid at last. He had 3 myrtles and he would dance with 3 of the Hadassim. When he saw this rabbi dancing there and he was going crazy and wild on the dance floor, he said to him, "You're embarrassing us, you old man." And he wasn't very respectful to him. Yet Kinoch Nafshem, when Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak passed away, there was a fire of surrounding his grave, separating his grave from the rest of the world. And the Gemidi, we have a tradition, that this fire that surrounds a grave does not come down to separate this person from the rest of the world. Only one person in a lifetime, or 2 people in a lifetime. In other words, they had a big schutz. Taisez and Hashem asked, how do you know that the reason is because he was dancing at weddings? Maybe he had other schutz. You know that Achav's wife, we'll learn another place, got all this credit because the one good thing she did was she used to be Sameach Bekalas. So the Gemara Taisez brings a medrash that the fire was shaped like a myrtle, like a hadas, and therefore they knew it came from that. The question that everybody asks is, so how could Rav Yehuda Bar Eloi didn't have the same thing? Why only Rav Shmuel Rav Yitzchak had it and not Rav Yehuda Bar Eloi? He also danced around with a hadas. Why didn't he have a fire going around his grave? Could be, I don't know, I didn't see this, but could be the reason is dancing is a wonderful thing. But Rav Shmuel Rav Yitzchak, people mocked him, and not just ordinary people. Rav Zeda, who was such a great Amidah, mocked him for dancing that, and yet he defied Rav Zeda and he continued. That was his chus. So the chus was not just that he danced. The chus was that he wasn't intimidated by his colleagues or his peers, and he continued doing what he thought was right. And that was his chus, why he had this fire going around his cave. Amar Rav Zeda. So Rav Zeda said, "Ahanyele shutese l'saba." Rav Zeda, the one who mocked him, then turned around and said that this shutese means the hadas. That this hadas, this branch of the hadas that he danced, that's the chus that he had. L'saba for this old man. For this old Tamachach. That he shtus, it means, as Chassidus explains, means as William Marsaita, he deviates from the norm. You can have a shtus of klippa, which is deviating from the norm and going in a bad way, and you can have a shtus de kedusha, you're deviating from the norm and going in a holy way. This shtus, he was not behaving the normal way, but it was in a good way, and therefore that was the shtus that he had. Others say shitasei l'sava, that his shita, his way, his approach, and his minig, that was his chus. Now let's look at the next Gemara, quite strange. Rab Acha markiv lo akaspe. Rab Acha used to carry the kala on his own shoulder, umerakid, and he would dance. Amri le Rabban said, should we do the same? Carry the kala on our shoulders. Amu, he said to them, if you look at a woman and you think that just a beam in a roof, then it's all right. But if not, you shouldn't, because you'll have a Yetzer Hara and you shouldn't do it. What he meant was that if shouldn't means that these are the beams that hold up the house. If you can see past the beauty of your woman and see that she's the one that keres abayis, the one who holds up the whole house, that's your approach. You're such a tzaddik, then fine, then you can. But otherwise, you should not be involved. I mean, just try to picture this. The great rabbi here, we actually had Ula as well. We'll talk about another Gemara, a similar thing. But the Rav Acha would have a kala on his shoulder. You're allowed to stare at the face of a kala kol shiva for 7 days. You're allowed to look at her with admirable eyes. So the chassid should realize what a pretty wife he has and make her more dear to him. But this is, the Rishonim, the Rosh says over here, that the Rosh says over here that when we say here that Allah is not like him, you're not allowed to stare at the color. We're talking about the next 6 days, but the first day, because it says the 7 days, the first day, by the chuppah and everything else, you permit it. And what's bothering the Rosh? What's bothering the Rosh is the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you have witnesses that she looked like a psula and she wore a veil and all that. Then that's all right. But how do you know if you're not looking at the color? So the Rosh says the first day you're permitted to look at. It's all the other days you're not allowed to look. Well, if you follow the Rosh, the Rosh is not saying his own opinion, he's quoting, then that explains the mitzvahs, because they're holding a gartel, whatever they're holding between them and the kala, but they're looking at the kala. However, the Rosh discounts that and he says, no, you're not allowed to look at the kala at all. Others want to make a difference between histakel and riyah. Because the Gemara says also histakel, you're not allowed to stare. But the riyah means a glance, you're allowed to. And the veil, no one has a problem with that, because they say you can see it from the back, you can see it from the side. It doesn't mean you have to stare at the face itself. Something about it further. Trying to remember, if there's two processions going on in the city at the same time, one is a procession going to a funeral down the main road, and another one, there's a procession going with the kala to the house of the chassan for the chuppah, and they don't want to mingle the two because one is crying and one is jubilant. So what happens is you move away the mace and let the kala proceed. We give the chayim before the mace. Is this the only thing where we give precedence to the chassan kala over the mace? What about let's say tzedakah? If the town has a fund and there's only limited funds, and you have a choice of either using it to bury somebody, making a nice funeral, or giving it to hachnosas kala. Big machlek is a shayim how to learn. The Rambam says then the mace comes first. It's only the procession that we talk about where the kala comes first. But other shayim hold no, that as brought down in Shulchan Aruch, that the kala comes first also when it comes to tzedakah. In all matters, the kala comes first because the chayim, the living, come before those who passed on. There's a Jewish king coming by, both processions have to move to the side and allow the king to walk through. We said about a king Agrippas, who was from the family Chashmonaim. Now, he technically wasn't really entitled to be a king because he came from a family of Avodim, and you have to have your mother a Jew as well. Machlekes Rashi tells you whether you need both parents Jewish or just your mother, but you need him, and that wasn't his case at all. But he became the king regardless, and he actually was favorable to the Yidden. He stepped aside the kala. The Chachamim praised him that he was so humble that he stepped aside and allowed the kala to continue. Shabchu, the Gemara asked, they praised him. McCloud, the Shapar, he did the right thing. But Amar Abashi didn't Abashi say, I feel the mandamar, even the one who says Nasi shemochal akvoide mochel, even the one who says that a Nasi has the right to forego the covet of a melech shemochal akvoide and kvoide mochel. A king has no right to forego his own covet. Amar, we learned Saim Tosim Alecha Melech, the Saim Tosim Alecha in Moser Alecha, that we have to fear a king and we have to revere a king and respect the king. So how can the king just step aside? So we answered Parashat Drachma. It was a fork on the road, so nobody realized that he was stepping aside. They thought that he was just going the other way. It didn't look like he was in any way, humbling his office. Now, the Gemara is difficult to understand. What does it have to do with the king? We have a mitzvah to fear the king, but the king himself do whatever he wants. How does the Gemara bring a raya that a king cannot forgo his covet because there's some tasim alecha melech? That we, the people, have to have awe and fear for the king, but the king himself can do whatever he wants. So from here, it seems a very interesting thing, and this is probably one of the biggest, if I would say personally, the biggest flaw of Trump, and that is there's the person and there's the office. When we talk about a king and everything else, it's irrelevant who the person is. It's the office that has to be respected, that has to be revered. And some kings don't realize that. Trump had absolutely no understanding of that idea, that his office and he's just a person and he has to respect the office. It's not about him. Nevertheless, so when it says, Same Tasim Alecha Melech, it includes the king as well. The king also has to have respect and awe for the office. And therefore he has no right. It's not his covered to be meichel. It belongs to the office, not him. Mashenke, when it comes to a rav, when it comes to a nasi, that comes to cover a toida. Toida is something that belongs to them. Toida delayu, and therefore they have the right to be meichel. We had this Gemara Megillah that you can mevatel Talmud Toida in order to go and join a procession of a levaya or v'achnosas kala. Amru Allah Rabbi Rabbi. They said about Rabbi Rabbi from mevatel Talmud Toida. Just Hamezach Kala that he used to. Rabbi Rabbi, the same one we had before, that he stopped learning in order to go out to a levaya or to achnosas kala. But when did he do that? When there was not enough people, sufficient people about the levaya. Yeshi or by the Chazakala. Yesh ima kol tzorche emavatin. You don't stop. The kama kol tzorche. How much is it? Omer Shmuel about Eini mashmei the Rab. Shmuel the son of Eini said the name of Rab. Treisen alfa gavre v'shisa alfa shepuri. If you have a levaya less than 12,000 people and another 6,000 people with horns declaring to the whole world about the person that just passed away, that means an insufficient amount of people. You should go to the levaya. Others say place of Alpha Gabri, 12,000 people in total, 6,000 ordinary people, 6,000 people with the shofars making all the declarations. Ula says no, the number of people you need is going to Chitzi Gabri, you can have a line, a wall of people, all the way from the walls of the city until the cemetery, which was always outside the city. Just like a person is supposed to learn Torah, just like when we gave the Torah, how many people were? That's when you take away. Just like a man is sinasa, just like when we receive the Torah, is Harsina, there was 600,000. After Tilasa, when we take the Torah away from the person, because if a person passed away, they can no longer turn Torah, is B'shishiribu. If you have less than 600,000 people, you should go to Levaya. This is talking about somebody who learned Chumash and he learned Mishnayos, but therefore you have to have a minimum of 600,000 people. If somebody was a teacher and taught others, less leishiyuda, there is no minimum, there's no maximum. 1 million people, 2 million people. And Chaim Kanievsky had 73,000 people. You can have double that, triple that. Everyone still has to go. Now, the big machlek is showing, because the fact of the matter, we don't do that today. How come we don't go to every? In fact, how can you live today? Live in a larger community. If you'll go to every levaya, when would you go to work? When would you learn? When would you daven? So the Rishonim bring you a machlekes. When the Gemara says mevatel Talmud Torah, does it mean that you have to or that you're allowed to? There are a number of Rishonim that say that it means you're permitted. Don't think it's bittul Torah. You're permitted to go to a levaya. You're permitted to do all these things. It's not, or go to a chasna. It's not called bittul Torah. Not that you have to. Others learn that you actually have to. And those who say it's permitted, they bring the proof is simple. The Gemara brings the story of Yehuda Bar Eloi that he used to do it. If the law says you have to, then what's the big deal? Yehuda Bar Eloi did it. Everyone has to. So they prove from that you don't have to. It's only permitted, and he used to do it. The Rosh and others trying to disagree. They say that no, that you have to mevatel Talmud Torah. And the proof from Yehuda Bar Eloi was because he was such a great tzaddik. By him, Torah sayim nasi. All he did was he learned Torah. In fact, he didn't even daven. Like Rabbi Yehuda only davened once in 30 days. So because he was learning Torah the whole time. And the Chiddush was, but yet he stopped learning Torah in order to go to a levaya. How come then we don't do that today? So there are some poskim who say that it's only if you happen to see the levaya that you have to go and join. The Gemara does not talk about a kala. We only talk about numbers for a kala. We only talk about numbers for levaya. So do we have to go to every chasna? How does that work? If you see a chasna kala going, you have to join in. So by a kala, they say whatever the kala feels she needs. And today, because we do it by invitation, whatever she feels she needs, she invited. So therefore, since you didn't receive invitations, she's saying to you, I don't need you. By a funeral, nobody gets invited. But by a chasna, you get invited. So therefore, they argue by a chasna, it's very different. Okay, now what about somebody who didn't learn at all or anything else? How many people have to come there? We talked about Kori Vishani. What about a guy, a simple person, never learned? How many people have to go to Levaya? So Rashi brings on top of the page here from the Shiltus Rabbi Choy Goyin, who was one of the Goyinim, and according to Taisus in the beginning of the Masechta, he actually wrote the Gemara. Rabbi Choy in the Gemara sometimes it's actually Rabbi Choy Goyin. So he says, someone doesn't learn at all, you don't have to stop what you're doing in order to join them, as long as they have enough misasking. And how many, Rashi doesn't say, but others say a minion. As long as they has a minion, it's good enough. Now, when it comes to noshim, so the big shakvatai about noshim, women, let's say, who they don't learn. So most of the Shonim say, since they don't have the mitzvah to learn, for them it's not a chsarim they don't learn. And on the contrary, remember you learn Gemara Brachas that Yud Zayin of an Aleph, it says that Gedola Haftocha Shehivticha L'Noshim Yosim Anoshim. The Gemara there says that women have a greater promise and a guarantee than men do, because they make sure that everybody else, not just the husband, but husband, the kids, so they have the multiple schar of learning Torah. So therefore, by Noshim, they're equal to Kori Vishani, and therefore whatever Kori Vishani, 600,000 people, 15,000, 18,000 people, 12,000, that is what you require there as well. Okay, back to the Gemara.
There was a Gemara, wait a sec, there was a Gemara, I think, in Chagiga, that where there was an Amoira who came to town, and there was a call of somebody dying, and he put the whole town in Chayrim, because nobody stopped working to go to the Levaya, and then they said, no, it's okay because we've got a Chevra Kedisha here.
It's Gemara Cotton, and there it talks about over there. There's another aspect. We talk about going to Levaya. There's another aspect whether you should stop your work in order to make sure that the mace has all the necessary needs. And there the Gemara says, if the mace doesn't have a chavrusim, and then the Gemara says that they divide the town into different parts, like a Chevra Kadisha, this area, and if there was some people taking care of them, then you don't have to stop working for that. That's a separate thing. That's working, malacha. Here we're talking about the levaya itself, not the preparation, the actual procession of the levaya. Two different things. Actually, Taisus brings alerts us to that as well. Okay, then the Mishnah said that if so the wife said, I was a psula, the husband said, no, you're an almana, you're only entitled to 100. So if there were witnesses that saw her go out with hinuma, that's the dress of a psula. What in the world is a hinuma? We haven't learned. It says the Gemara, my hinuma, what's a hinuma? Is surcha bar papa mashmei dizidi Amar. He said, tanuda de asa. He said, you know what it is? It was like an oven, which is round, made up of hadassim. In other words, they used to, I guess by the chuppah, they used to put a lot of hadassim myrtles when it was a psula. Some connection between hadas, and that's why maybe they were dancing before with hadassim, because somehow or another the hadas represents a psula. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Kriyasa, a veil, the nimla bakalasa, so that she can fall asleep in. If the rabbi at the chuppah talks too long, the kala can fall asleep, and no one knows the difference. She's not embarrassed because nobody can see. From here, the Mefarshim bring a proof that a veil should actually be thick. That by a chuppah should be thick, not just because it says asal istakel, but because it says right here that she can fall asleep, but she's not embarrassed because nobody can see her eyes if they're open or if they're closed. As Rashi clearly says, he says in our place, he's put on a veil, and she used to close her eyes because nobody can really see. And the word Heinuma, says Rashi, comes from the word tunuma. Tunuma means to doze off. So she used to doze off. Imagine this is such a momentous occasion, and the chassan is standing there, and he's perspiring and nervous, and the kala is sleeping. Pretty amazing. Anyway, Rabbi Yochanan said they used to pass out toasted wheat. They used to throw, like we throw on Shabbos before. They used to throw out toasted wheat by what do you call it? By the chasna, by the chuppah. It says the Gemara. Sorry, what place? Sorry, look, the Yehuda, right? Okay, the Yehuda in that region of Eretz Yisrael, that's what they did. That's the proof. But Bavel, what did they do in Bavel? Rav said again, it's hard to picture this. They were so innocent in those days. Rav said that the women would go to all the young rabbis and smear oil all over their face and on their head and the hair. Definitely, they were much more innocent. We had the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan said, how earlier generations were so innocent, and later on they weren't. So Amalei Papa Labaya. Papa never saw this. He said to Abaya, "What do you mean? But they used to put that oil that you put in the hair to get rid of lice. By every chasa, they would check. The women would go and check the lice and put the oil. And what is that all about? That's some kind of some kind of herbs or incense. Amalei Yasma. He called them often. No, whenever there's a beautiful minhag and you never had the opportunity to benefit from it, they would use the word yasma. You yasm of this particular minhag. Your mother did not do this. Obviously, Abai wasn't at the wedding, even though it was a student. He said to him, at your wedding, your mother didn't go around putting oil on all the heads of all the young people there, all the young men. There was one of the rabbis. He asked the Rabbi Barula that he's got a son married to a girl in the family of Rabbi Barula, or others say Rabbi Barula asked his son that got married with one of the rabbis. But all the women, they would go ahead and put oil in the heads of all the men, and the Rabbi Mashas Ma'isa. So that's what they do in Bavel. In Bavel, if it's a psula, in part of the simcha, they would put oil on everybody's head. I'm not sure exactly what the significance, why dafka that particular activity, but that was a minhag. So therefore, that was a sign of a psula. And if they didn't do that, then obviously she wasn't a psula. Armalta mai, but you can't really say that because Papa clearly didn't do it in his time. What about Almana? What did they do there? What simmer did they do there? They would not throw toasted wheat. In other words, we learned before yesterday that not doing something like the wine, the thing of the wine doesn't prove anything because it could be there's no wine around. But throwing toasted wheat was something that was so common that many times it was not even during a chasna, it was just any joyous occasion. But so therefore it was cheap, I guess. Toasted wheat was not a problem. But they made sure that by almana they would not share any of this toasted wheat. So people right away knew she must have been an almana. Okay, now we're back to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah told us that Yeshua is Maida. Even though I argued with you in the case of Migui, I don't believe in this idea that since I could have said a better lie, as Rashi explained in other Rishonim, because maybe not everybody's so smart. Not everybody thought of the better lie. Or maybe sometimes people think, reverse psychology. If I don't say the better lie, I'm more credible because people say, if this person's a liar who said a better lie, must be a very honest person. So on the contrary, I'll get some kudos for saying that. So I'm sure he doesn't believe in an ordinary migui, but a stronger migui, a migui di iba yishasik, a migui could have kept quiet. It could have. That is a very powerful migui, and that definitely is compelling evidence the person saying the truth. So the Mishnah then tells us if he comes over to a Yosim and he says that this field used to belong to your father, but I bought it. Pesha asura, pesha hitin. The mouth that incriminated is the same mouth that sort of saved him, redeemed him. So therefore, I'm taking the property, the property is mine. That Rabbi Shua is made. It works. Some say it's the highest form of migui. Some say it's not even a migui. It's much more powerful than a migui. A migui might not be something so logical, but this is definitely logical, and anybody could have thought of it. Say nothing. Keep quiet. You don't have to be smart to realize. Say nothing. But the Mishnah then said, if there were witnesses that knew that this field belonged to the father, if there were witnesses, then you no longer have a migui. What could you have said? You had no choice because they witnessed the father. What do you say? It's my field. On what basis? So therefore, that's a different story, and he's not believing. You have to give it back to the children. Machlekes Rashi and Taisus, if there were no witnesses, but the children asked him, "This field doesn't belong to our father," and he said, "Yes, but I bought it." According to Rashi, that's not that migui is a migui rather than pesha asur. Even though he could have denied it, maybe he didn't think of it, and therefore, according to Rashi, Rabbi Shua would not be made there, and he had to give the field back. According to Taisus, it's so easy to deny it because there's no evidence, no proof whatsoever. That's good enough. That's a very powerful migui. Migui the e boy shas. It could have kept quiet. Okay, says the Gemara. So Gemara wants to know basically why are we talking about? We're going to want to know this next today and tomorrow. Why are we talking about a field that this field belonged to your father? Why not say the field belonged to you and I bought it from you? And then later on, tomorrow, why talk about a field? Talk about a simple case. This money I owed your father $100, but I paid it back already. Why talk about a field at all? That's nothing more. Why don't we learn that Yeshua said? He's made I come over to my friend and say, this field, used to be your field. But I bought it for you. Why talk about his father? I never really understood the Gemara's question here because in practical terms, where the field belonged to you or not. Why would I even bring it up? Why would I tell you that if you bought a house with somebody, why would you go over and tell them, this house used to belong to you, but I bought it? We both know that. If it's your father's, I'm coming over to give you some information that you had no idea. And I'm telling you, this field used to belong to you years ago. It used to belong to your father or your grandfather, whatever it is, and I bought it from them. That makes sense to have such a conversation. Why would you have this conversation in the first place? I don't know. But he was asking in halacha, forget about the practicality of it. Why don't we just, if we try to bring out a halacha of Rabbi Yeshua, just say that this field used to be yours and I bought it. Same thing, same outcome. Well, it says, why? We want to learn the next case. The next clause is, and the witnesses that the field was other person, then I have to return the field. Now, we're going to learn more about Basra in Cheskes Abatim, the concept of a chazaka, which is, if I purchase the field, how long do I have to keep the deed, the contract? Remember those days they didn't have banks and safes and all that. How long am I responsible to keep it? Like yesterday we learned about receipts. We don't like people having to keep contracts long term because it's a big responsibility, and you have nowhere to store it. So the Gemara there says that there's a thing called a chazaka, 3 years. If I had the property for 3 years and nobody protested, I no longer need to keep the documents because the fact everybody knows I was here for 3 years, that's sufficient evidence. Whether the chazaka, big machlek is the Ramban and others, so the question is the chazaka itself makes it mine, or this is just proof that it's mine, whatever. But the bottom line is I have 3 years of chazaka. So the Gemara is going to ask over here, if I say to somebody, if two agents say this field used to belong to Shimon, and I say yes, but I bought it, and the Mishnah says you're not believed. What exactly is talking? What are we talking about here? Did I have a chazaka or did I not have a chazaka? What are we talking about? I had 3 years chazaka. I might let him. Why isn't he believed? I have a chazaka. It's a normal case where I buy from somebody 3 years. I'm there. Nobody protested. I don't need a contract anymore. And if I didn't have a chazaka and everybody knows the field belongs to Shimon and I'm there 18 months and I claim I bought it, I don't have the document. They'll throw me out. I need this mission. Tell me that's the whole Cheskes Abatim. I mean, that's the case of the whole Cheskes Abatim is if you buy a field and you have no evidence and I don't have a chazaka, I'm tossed out. So the Gemara, so that's why we didn't want to learn that it's talking about a case where I'm discussing it with a peer of mine, saying the field is yours. Says the Gemara, no. So isn't the same thing with the father's field? The same thing. If there were witnesses that the field belonged to the father, same thing. If this guy was there for 3 years, then that's his. And if he wasn't there for 3 years, then obviously it's not his. What I need the Mishnah to tell me. It's the same question you have if we're talking about vis-a-vis a friend of mine, is the same thing you'd be talking about to his father. The same thing applies to his father. And say, if I ate 3 years chazaka, then why shouldn't I be believed? So what if there were Eidim? All the Eidim can say is that this field used to belong to that person, but I bought it 3 years ago and I'm here. And I lost my document. Doesn't matter. I'm here 3 years. Nobody protested. There's no macha, no protest. And if there was no 3 years of chazaka, then of course I'm not believed. I don't need our mission to tell us that the witnesses the field belonged to somebody else and I have no evidence and I was there for 18 months. I have no right to. Says the Gemara. No. When it comes to the father, there's a chiddush in our Mishnah. And the chiddush will be that there will be a chazaka, yet I'm not believed. And why is that? Because we're going to talk about a case where the chazaka, straddled 3 years. 2 of those years, the original person, the father, was alive. And then the 3rd year, the father died, so the heir took over. So we would have thought, I have a 3-year chazaka, I have a good claim, and too bad, nobody protested. The chiddush in our Mishnah is because the 3rd year it was under the son. The son had no idea that Itaka belonged to his father. He thought that the guy bought it. He doesn't know, and therefore the fact that I was there, nobody protested, is not good enough. I should have kept the contract, because the reason why he wasn't moich is not because he agrees that I bought it. It's because he has no idea. He doesn't know all of the what do you call the financial dealings of his father. Says the Gemara, there is a chiddush in Ba'al Mishnah. That's why Mishnah talks about a father. You're going to 8 2 years chazaka. We're talking about the same case in the Mishnah. A witness came along and said it belonged to his father. 2 of the years that he had the field, the father was alive, and the father didn't protest, but he didn't have to. He had 3 years up his sleeve. But then the father died, and now the son took over. One of those years is the son. And the chiddush here is, even though I had 3 years chazaka, I should have kept the contract. Why? Like Rav Huna. That if I am moved into a property that belongs to a young kid, it was a yasim, then the fact that I was there 3 years and didn't protest proves nothing. The yasim had no idea. You think the yasim knows, he has the wherewithal to know that if this field belongs to my father, I should protest? Not at all. So it means nothing. You should have maintained that contract. And the chiddush is that if sometime during those 3 years that Yosef became bar mitzvah, it doesn't matter. Since you came into the field when he was still young, and he had no idea, he thinks that you were still entitled to it. He has no idea. He doesn't even question it, because he remembers, when he was young, you still were in that field. So therefore, and therefore he didn't protest. And the Taisa brings from the Rashbam Babasa that even if the kid became bar mitzvah during his father's life, but this person moved into the field 2 years before his father died. This kid became bar mitzvah a year before his father died. And even though he was bar mitzvah when the father died, he's still considered a cotton, still considered young, because since you started in that field when he was young and he had no idea what was going on, and his father didn't share that kind of information, therefore he didn't protest. Says the Gemara, if that's the whole purpose of our Mishnah, to teach us this chiddush, so what does Rav Huna add that we didn't know from the Mishnah? But Rav Huna, Masis Shmini, come teach you what the Mishnah says. Everyone knows what the Mishnah says. This very discussion we had here, that's Rav Huna's chiddush. That why does the Mishnah talk about the father's field? To teach you a case where there was a chazaka, 2 years by the father, 1 year by the son, and it's not called a chazaka. That's Rav Huna. Rav Huna's not teaching us a new din. He's explaining to us the Mishnah. Or you can say his chiddush, Rav Huna's real chiddush is that even though the child became bar mitzvah during the 3 years, you would have thought, okay, now that he's an adult, and he wasn't meicher, the protest at least 3 years later. From the moment he became bar mitzvah, you would think, okay, let's wait 3 years. If he doesn't protest, then good enough. Tells you no. Since you entered the field when he was a minor, he assumes that you always owned the field, and therefore he would never protest. Proves nothing. You need to maintain that contract. Then if so, why talk about? Why don't we talk about? Go back to our original question. Let's talk about vis-a-vis your friend. You tell the friend that it was yours and I bought it from you. If there were 8 in what's the chiddush? No, there was a 3-year chazaka, the same thing. But 2 years the friend was here where you could have protested, and then the 3rd year he had to flee, became a fugitive, and he was not around, and therefore he couldn't protest, and therefore you should have maintained the contract. The chiddush is that even though you were 3 years in this field and nobody protested, since the last year he wasn't able to protest, therefore you should have kept your chazaka is not a valid chazaka. You should have kept the shtar. So we look, why don't you look into Ochel Stein before the Achas later for him, 2 years in front of your friend, 1 year he wasn't. You're going to Barach, he fled. So let's analyze what happened there. Barach Machmas, why did he flee? Why did he become a fugitive? Either Barach Machmas the Flush because question of life or death. The Pshita Lemen, we need our mission to tell you, the guy couldn't be here and he had to flee for his life. He had no idea what was happening, so therefore he didn't protest. Maybe he didn't want anybody to know his whereabouts. So therefore, the fact that you are in the field is not a chazaka. You should have maintained the contract. He couldn't be meich. He was running for his life. He couldn't be meich. Of course, there's no chazaka. I don't need Amish to tell you that. No, boss. He fled because of he had many lenders and he couldn't pay his loans, so he just fled. He absconded. Then he has no excuse. He could have been meich from wherever he is, and no one has to know where he is. Just pass the word around, because the chazaka he would have heard about. That spreads. He should that somebody moved into this guy's properties, but he should have then spread word back. Especially he would be interested in finding out what's going on with my land, and then he should have sent word back because amacho the kaimlon machosh that even if you weren't there in front of you, if you would have protested far away, the protest would make its way to the person on the land, and it would have found out. And the fact that you didn't protest means the chazaka is about the chazaka. And therefore, the fact that Adim knew you were there before proves nothing, and it would have been a good chazaka. So, what's the case of our Mishnah? What do you ask me a question? And therefore, we reject this idea that we should talk in our Mishnah about vis-a-vis your colleague or your peer, because then we would not be able to learn the part of the Mishnah about witnesses who said that it belonged to your father, and therefore he's no longer believed. If he had a chazaka and the guy fled because of matters of life or death, of course he's not believed. I mean, the Mishnah tell you that because where's your contract? And if he had no chazaka. Sorry, and if the guy ran away for money matters, then you have a good chazaka. Of course, you're believed. Why is the Mishnah saying not? And how do I know that? How do I know a machosh shalei b'fanav is valid? It's not, but the Mishnah shows the chazaka. You learn that Israel broke up into 3 parts. When it comes to chazaka, Yehuda, Eber, Yarden, and Galil. If you were, let's say, in the area of Yehuda, Galil, but your property was in Galil, and somebody moved into your property in Galil, or the Galil, Yehuda, or you lived in Galil and somebody moved into your property and you owned in Yehuda, ain't a chazaka. It's not a valid chazaka because you couldn't protest until you are in the same nation. So on the contrary, it seems in this Mishnah here that a macha, if you're not present, is not a valid macha. So the Mishnah continues. Gemara continues. But we try to understand. My kasava, what's exactly pshat in the Mishnah? If you believe that a protest doesn't have to be right there, I can be far away, then I feel Yehuda Galil Nami. Then even if I live in Yehuda, the property in Galil, I should have protested. Why does the Mishnah say it's not? It's there's no protest there if you're chazak is about chazak. And he kasava machash in front of if you tell me not, the reason is because he's far away. It's not a macha. Then I feel Yehuda Nami. Even if we're in the same area of Israel, but we're in different cities, then my macha is not a valid macha. If your chazak is not a good chazak, and you should have kept the shtar. So the Gemara concludes how to understand the Mishnah. Within Yehuda itself, generally it's all one government. Is machosh I could have been in one part of Eretz Yisrael and I could have been in the other part of Yehuda, and it would have been a valid macha, and therefore your chazaka is a valid chazaka. You don't need a contract to hold. You don't have to hold on the contract after 3 years. But in Israel, there were parts. Sometimes the Rome, ruled this region of Israel, and maybe Greece ruled that region, or Persia ruled that region. And because there were different hegemonies there, every region was different, and Macha would not pass. When there's a state of war, it doesn't pass from one area to the other area. Therefore, you don't have a chazaka either, and you should have kept the contract. Well, why use the example of Yehuda and Galil? Because the Stam Yehuda and Galil Kishas Chayim Dami. In those days, Yehuda and Galil were run by 2 different governments. They were always at war, and they didn't allow people to travel from one area to the other area. And that's why, just using them as examples, a perfect example where a macha, if it's not present, is a valid macha. And therefore the chazak is a valid chazak. If 3 years go by, I didn't protest, it's good. But a macha shalei b'fanav, where there's a state of war and there's no way from news to pass around, then the macha is it's not a macha. The chazak is not a chazak. You should have kept the contract. So bottom line, the Gemara concludes we couldn't talk about property vis-a-vis another person, because in the second case of the Mishnah, where there were witnesses that the property belonged to the other person, then why does the Mishnah say that it's not yours? If you had a chazak, then definitely it is yours. And if you didn't have a chazak, then definitely it's not yours. We don't need a Mishnah here to tell us that. And that's why we're talking about a case where we're talking about the kid's father. The kid's father owned the field. And I had 3 years chazakah, 2 years by the father and 1 year from the son. And the chiddush is that is not called the chazakah. The son had no idea.